When Donald Trump started running for president, Nate Silver said that there was a 2% chance he would win the election. And Scott Adams, the creator of the cartoon Dilbert, said that there was a 98% chance that Trump won the election. And of course, Trump won the election, so what did Scott Adams know that Nate Silver didn't know? Well, most people were seeing Trump as like this big, irrational buffoon, and all the presidents that they had ever seen before were not big, irrational buffoons, and so they thought, like, oh, this guy's got no chance, his campaign is just a publicity stunt. Whereas Scott Adams saw something else. Scott Adams took a hypnosis class when he was in his 20s, and it totally changed the way he saw the world. It gave him this new lens to see everything through. And that is the persuasion lens, right? He saw that Donald Trump is really good at persuading people. He's very talented at communicating. He's very good at getting people to talk about him. He's very good at playing the media, and he's like, well, this guy's got what it takes to become president. Scott Adams says that Trump is, quote, the most persuasive human I have ever observed. What makes him so persuasive? Well, Scott Adams wrote a book about that called Win Bigly, and I'm going to tell you what he said. If you hate Donald Trump, if you're like, a super hardcore liberal, and you're like, Donald Trump is dangerous and he's terrible, and people ask you, like, why is Donald Trump so bad? One of the reasons you'll probably give is because Donald Trump lies all the time, right? Like, he gets up and gives a speech, and he'll say a bunch of stuff off the cuff, and he won't really fact check himself, and a lot of it won't be true. And people are always like, how come he gets away with this? How come people don't hold him accountable for this? How come people don't call him out on his bullshit? And when they do, it just kind of like slides off his back. Well, the reason is because people don't think in terms of facts, right? People don't think like facts and reason and logic. They just kind of like don't sink in that deeply to the human brain. What does sink in deeply is what Scott Adams calls visual persuasion, repetition, and emotion. And Donald Trump is really good at communicating in those three things. Now, a great example of this is the wall, right? Now, if you actually want to prevent illegal immigration, building a wall is like definitely not the most cost-effective way to do it, right? Like if somebody's coming from Guatemala or El Salvador, they want to come to the United States, a wall is like not going to be the biggest of their worries, right? They've got a whole bunch of other shit that they got to deal with. A wall, like if they can deal with other stuff, then a wall isn't really going to stop them. But a wall is great for convincing voters that you're serious, right? Because a wall is something that's very visual, right? Like if you talk about, oh, I'm going to have immigration checkpoints and we're going to ramp up spending on border security, that's really vague. People don't know what it means, right? If you say wall, that paints a very vivid picture in people's heads, right? Like there's, oh shit, it's a wall. That's what it is. Same thing with how Donald Trump branded his political opponents, right? Like every single one of Trump's opponents in the primaries and Hillary Clinton, he had some special name for them, right? Like Lion Ted or Little Marco or Crooked Hillary. And like even if those things aren't really true, like Hillary Clinton isn't as corrupt as everyone thought she was, which is probably like, I don't know the extent of Hillary Clinton's actual corruptness, but she wasn't as corrupt as everybody said. But if you just say Crooked Hillary over and over again, it's got kind of a nice ring to it. And once you start thinking of Hillary Clinton, you'll think, oh, she's crooked. Or like if you're thinking about Ted Cruz, you'll say, oh, Donald Trump calls him Lion Ted over and over again, so he must be lying. And every time you hear Ted Cruz say something, you'll wonder, is he lying? Donald Trump once said, I have the best words. Nobody has better words than me. And he's kind of right about that, right? Like, he's really good at coming up with words to describe things in simple terms that everybody can understand. And rationally, this stuff shouldn't work, but it does work, right? It's not logical, but it's how the human brain works. And the other politicians didn't figure that out. And Donald Trump did figure that out, and that's why he became the president. Let's imagine that you go to a baseball game with your friend, and you're a fan of one of the teams, and he's a fan of the other team, and the game ends. It's a really close game, and it ends on a super controversial call on a play at the plate, and your team wins, right? And somebody asks you about, like, hey, what happened in the game? Do you think that the runner was safe at home? You'll probably be like, oh yeah, the runner was safe. The umpire made a great call. And your friend will be like, what the fuck? How he was out by a mile. Like, were we even watching the same play? And the truth is, you were watching the same play in a sense, but your brains were thinking about it differently. You were paying attention to different things, and you were seeing things through a filter that told you what you wanted to see. Politics works the exact same way. If you're a hardcore Trump supporter and let's say Donald Trump lowers taxes, You'll be like, oh, Donald Trump, his tax bill is great. It puts so much money back in my pocket. He's really fighting for me and making the country great again. And if you're a Democrat and you see Donald Trump lowering taxes, you'll be like, oh, he's helping the rich. He's putting back money into the pockets of his cronies. This is a move to help the 1% at the expense of the 99%. And Trump is Hitler. He's a Nazi. Right? Like, we see the same things, but we interpret it in different ways. The way Scott Adams talks about this is there's two movies playing on the same screen, right? Like, you're watching one movie, I'm watching another movie. We think we're watching the same movie because they're the same details, but we're noticing them very differently. We're seeing different things. To exploit this, Donald Trump was kind of vague on purpose about his policy positions, right? Now, if you ask yourself, what are Donald Trump's policy positions? It's a difficult question to answer. Like, he was president for 4 years. It's still not really clear what he believes in, right? Because if you want to say that he's pro-choice, you can find a bunch of examples of him doing pro-choice things. If you want to say he's pro-life, you can find a bunch of examples of him saying pro-life things and doing pro-life things. If you want to say he's, anti-healthcare, you can find a bunch of examples of him being anti-healthcare. If you want to say he's pro-healthcare, you can find other examples of him saying pro-healthcare stuff. And the truth is, like, Trump tried not to talk about policy that much because he knew that if he talked about policy, if you could pin him down on like, hey, he's, super pro-this or super anti-this, that would make all the people who disagreed with him not like him. Whereas if he was just kind of vague about it and he talked about other stuff like how crooked his opponents were or how he had all these friends in high places, then people would just kind of fill in the details with what they wanted to hear. When Trump won the presidential election in 2016, it surprised pretty much everybody, and everybody wrote a bunch of think pieces about why Donald Trump really won the election afterwards, and they all had a different explanation. They were like, oh, he understood the plight of low-class white people, or he connected with voters on a visceral level or whatever. And there's probably some truth to a lot of the explanations that people came up with. But in my opinion, the biggest reason why Donald Trump became the president is because he hacked people's brains, right? Like, I work in marketing. My job is to come up with sales messages that persuade people to buy stuff. One thing that I noticed is that politicians suck at sales and marketing, right? They don't know what they're doing. They're completely out of touch with their voters. And Donald Trump is the exception, right? Donald Trump knew how to sell himself. Like, he had spent his entire career working in business and negotiating with people and just trying to get people to kind of understand him and see his point of view. And he just took those skills and applied them to politics, and he did them better than the politicians did. So he won. Trump won because he played the politics game better than the politicians did. So don't hate the player, hate the game. So anyways, that's it for today's episode of Theo's Book Club. If you're new around here, my name's Theo, and I make brief videos like this one that talk about all the books that I'm reading and all the big ideas inside them so that you can learn the stuff that I learned and so you can decide which books are interesting enough for you to read for yourself. If you like this video, then please do me a big favor. Hit the thumbs up button right down there. That tells YouTube, hey, I like this video, and YouTube will say, oh, hey, maybe other people will like it too, and they'll show it to more people, and I'll grow my channel. And also, speaking of which, if you want to see more of these book review videos pop up in your feed instead of whatever you normally watch, you can hit the subscribe button, and you'll see my smiling face more often. And until next time, don't be too logical, and have a great day.